Gambling is tough on our brains. Statistics, probabilities, they're extremely abstract and hard to fathom for us humans. We just aren't evolved to see them readily. But poker, it's a game of skill, and in many ways embodies how the human mind works best, especially when it comes to decision making. Poker probabilities are what they are. They're not designed by a game designer, and poker will break you out of your illusions really damn quick. Today on the show, my friend poker champ and author Maria Konnikova will explore how humans make decisions, what poker can tell us about reading human motivation, some tells at the poker table, and how we can prevent emotional thinking or going on tilt. Enjoy this episode here on The Jordan Harbinger Show with Maria Konnikova. Why did you decide to become a professional poker player again? How did this happen to you?
I'm still asking myself the same question. Initially, I had no interest in poker and came to this project because I was interested in luck and in trying to figure out, how do we learn the limits of our own control?
Mm-hmm.
How do we learn where our skill ends and just chance begins? It's a really, really difficult thing to figure out in real life. Right? Life is so noisy. There's so much going on, and you can always just kind of BS your way through it and say, "Oh, well, that wasn't my fault, and yeah, I'll take credit for that. Thank you very much." So it's just noisy. It's messy. So I wanted something that would help me disentangle that. Someone suggested that I start reading about game theory. They're like, if you're interested in chance, game theory is a good place to start. So I ended up reading John von Neumann's Theory of Games and learned that von Neumann was both a poker player and someone who believed that poker was the perfect game for looking at strategic decision making in life. So by all accounts, he was a really horrible poker player, but he was a brilliant mind and a brilliant mathematician, and the inventor of game theory and the computer and the hydrogen bomb.
Wow.
So many things this guy did. Just brilliant, just not a great poker player. But he said poker is actually the perfect game for human decision making because it's a game of incomplete information. So there are things I know, there are things you know, there are things we both know. I need to try to figure out what you know, what you think I know. And so I'm playing, I'm playing the person, I'm playing the situation. Anyway, this really intrigued me, and I thought, let me read more about this poker thing. I did, and decided, hey, you know what? This is my book. Why don't I learn poker? Why don't I immerse myself in the world that I want to write about and see if, with the help of someone really good, I ended up choosing Eric Seidel, who's one of the greatest poker players of all time. And luckily he agreed to be a part of this project. I said, why don't I actually, see how far I can go? And it was supposed to be just a year of us working together. And I ended up becoming good and winning a major international title and getting a sponsorship from PokerStars and joining Team Pro, and somehow found myself as a professional poker player.
That is, I've known you for several years, and so you know what I mean when I say that is kind of ridiculous, right?
No, I mean, it's not kind of ridiculous. I think that is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, what in the world is this even?
Yeah, it's like saying, I want to learn a little bit about soccer for this book. Oh, I'm just going to go work with Cristiano Ronaldo, and Manchester United wants me to play for them now because I got good.
Yeah, that's actually kind of what happened, except I'd be absolute shit at soccer. I have very little actual athletic ability and zero hand-eye coordination. I'd be better at soccer than at baseball, though, because the thought of a ball going toward my face just petrifies me. I think the first pitch I'd just go, duck down, and that would be the end. That would be the end of my baseball career.
Yeah, you get hit with a soccer ball in the head. It's not the end of you don't have to go to the hospital, generally speaking. So yeah, you'd be a little better off. So you wanted to learn poker to learn, among other things, decision making as a skill, sort of maybe to disentangle luck versus skill in our daily lives, or in your daily life, maybe.
That's exactly right. Because when I tried to do it before, so when I was at Columbia, I studied decision making when I was getting my PhD in psychology, and it was really fascinating because I saw lots of really, really smart people making really silly types of mistakes. So when you put them in an environment with a ton of uncertainty, and what I actually did was had them play stock market games where they had to pick different stocks and bonds and trade them, and I would then, play tricks on them, like suddenly the stock that used to give a lot of money would suddenly become bad with some percentage of the time. So the rules of the game would change. And I found that really smart people and people who were good at investing. So we worked with both students and with professional investors to get data for this, that they oftentimes failed to see that, failed to change their strategy, and thought they were more in control than they actually were. So they suffered from something called the illusion of control. So I saw that actually even smart people in real world situations, and sure, this was a game, but it was noisier than poker. I mean, stock market simulation.
Sure.
That they would often go wrong. Like they'd take credit when things were going well, and they discount it when things weren't. They're like, oh, this isn't my fault. My strategy is great. There's something wrong with this program.
Right. Yeah, the real market doesn't behave like this ever.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. They would say things like that. It was just kind of
It's funny.
astounding to see that. So you just said it as a joke, but this was a literal quote that some people said.
I believe it because nobody would say that playing blackjack. Like, oh,
right.
The dealer never gets 21 3 times. Yes, of course it happens. Like, have you played blackjack before? It happens all the time.
Exactly. So I saw in poker an opportunity to actually cut through some of that noise.
Yeah.
Because you can't be like, oh, well, I made the right decision getting in, my pocket sevens against pocket aces.
Right.
No, you didn't. I mean, maybe you did. It depends on how the action played out. But, you were not a favorite. Or you can actually start to figure out, okay, how do I look at my decision process and how do I separate it completely from the outcome? Because there are elements I control, right? I control how I play. I control, whether I choose to play a hand, and if I play it, how I play it. Am I going to raise? Am I going to call? What am I going to do? You can control your reactions. You can control your thought process, but you can't control the next card. You have no idea what card's coming out next, unless you're cheating, unless you've marked the cards. And that in that case, what card's coming next. But if you didn't do that, then all of a sudden, you could make the best decision possible and get your money in as like a 75% favorite, and then bingo, 25% happens. And you know what? 25% is a lot.
It's a lot.
Going to happen a lot of times, and you're going to lose, and the outcome's going to be bad. But your decision was good, so that's fine. And sometimes it'll flip, and you'll actually get your money in, and you'll see, oops, I'm a dog. I'm 75% to lose. And the miracle card comes, and oftentimes it's easy to forget and be like, oh, I'm a genius. I knew that card was coming. But if you keep thinking like that, you're going to go broke eventually. Because if you keep actually thinking that you're a genius and you knew you were psychic, you knew that magic card was coming, then you're going to lose all your money. So really what you have to do is, okay, I screwed up. Why did I screw up? How do I fix my process? So
instead of using statistics and math, or only statistics and math, you actually wanted to use psychology and human behavior to win at poker. And that's a unique take, because I think a lot of people go, oh, there's a lot of people who've studied poker. What's the big deal? But you even talk about some of these, I don't know if they're statisticians, but they kind of play that way, where they've got some simulator at home and they just memorize all the combinations of cards they have, and they go, okay, I'm 50% to lose right now, or 50% to win, or 75%, like you said before, and they just play those numbers. But you've got a different take, which is, I'm going to see if I can use my PhD in psychology to win at poker, which, your grandma was a huge fan of, apparently, according to the book.
Yes, my grandma was a huge fan, remains a huge fan of what I'm doing. I think she thinks that I sold my soul to the devil. But yes, I mean, I think all the best players know you need both. You need both the mathematics and the statistics and the psychology. But depending on whom you ask, you'll get different answers. Because there are some people who will say, you know what, you really don't need the psychology. A lot of that is just bullshit. And just know the math really well and work with your solvers and you'll be great. Then there are the other people who think, oh, all those math guys, pot odds are all you need. Like, all that is crazy. I play the man. I play the situation. And I think there's an in-between. But I do think that it's really important to use your strengths. Use what you know, what you're good at. I took my last math class in high school. I am
Yeah.
not a mathematician. I'm a writer. I mean, even in psychology, people are like, oh, but you did stats. I was like, actually, no, I hired a statistician to do my stats for me. I paid someone to do the stats. I didn't do them, which is great. It's actually good research methodology because they're not biased.
Then you're
They
not,
don't know
yeah.
what you're looking for. So that's totally legitimate, but that's what I did. So my math background, I count on my fingers, literally. I still count on my fingers. My math has gotten better with poker, but I'm not going to be competing with a stats PhD.
Yeah.
Ain't happening. And I know that. And my strength is psychology. So I figured, why don't I use what I know? And then sure, I'll supplement it with the math. I'll do my best to learn that, but I'm never going to beat those guys at their own game. So why don't I just try to understand what they're doing? And instead of trying to beat them at that way, try to beat them using the things that I know a lot better than they do, which is the psychology of decision making, which is how the mind works, which is how people react to emotional situations. And so that was the way that I approached it.
You say in the book that it's not the best hand in poker, it's the best player. So the best hand doesn't win most of the time. Most of the time it's a skill-based decision. Or did I read that incorrectly?
No, that's absolutely right. In fact, according to one study that several economists ran of hundreds of thousands of hands that they analyzed in online poker, the best hand won 12% of the time.
Really?
So that means the best player won 88% of the time. And over 2/3 of the time, the hand didn't even go to showdown, which means that someone won without ever having to show their cards. And so that just goes to show how much of a skill game it is, and how often people just outplay you, and you end up folding the best hand. Or if you're the good player, you can win with crap. And that to me is just the quintessential reason why it's a skill game, because you mentioned blackjack before. You can't do that at blackjack. You need to have the best hand. Sure, you can calculate your odds and know when you're supposed to double and all of these things, but at the end of the day, if the dealer has 21, you lose. Right? There's no, unless you have 21 too. there's no way to win with 18 when there's no way to bluff the dealer and be like, I think I have the stronger hand. But in poker you can. And so that's such a huge difference. That just shows the difference between gambling and poker.
Is it essentially there's a very finite limit to skill then in blackjack, where as soon as you know some of the rules and some of the strategies, you're kind of done? You don't need to watch 30,000 hours of blackjack tournaments, or if that even exists, to learn how to kick ass.
Are there blackjack tournaments?
I don't know.
I'm fascinated.
I doubt it. Why would there be, right? It's like it's your grandma against my mom and myself, and we're all equally probably going to have the same odds, and it's not that exciting. Yeah.
True. All right.
Okay.
So anyway, I interrupted you.
I don't know exactly where I was going with that, other than to ask about the description experience gap, because I love these little psychological concepts, and this is the idea that we tend to go on what feels right versus data. I mean, isn't that what being human means almost in this day and age?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we are really not wired for statistics and probabilities. The way the brain works is through experience. So if I sit here right now, so if someone listens to our podcast and we start talking through some math stuff, they might think they understand while they're listening, but unless they've actually experienced it themselves, it doesn't really register nearly as much as experiencing something and actually going out and saying, okay, let me play poker, let me feel this for myself. And so normally, since we learn much better from experience, we end up having completely incorrect statistical intuitions, because if something happens to us once, we overweigh it. So we think, oh, well, this is, I need to prepare for this. You can think about our ancestors, they see a tiger in the bushes when they're going picking berries in those bushes, and they say, we can never go back here. And if someone were to suddenly appear and say, actually, statistically speaking, tigers here are incredibly rare. This was an anomaly. And the tiger will only be here 0.5% of the time.
Right.
They'll be like, screw that. I don't know what that is. Tiger, bad. I'm not coming back here. Right. So we learn from that personal experience and not from someone telling us, actually, don't worry about it. That was a very rare occurrence. And you know what? It was smart, because the people who who went back probably got killed by
eaten.
the tiger.
Right. It's a whole like reproductive DNA type scenario.
Exactly. And so, but that persists now. And so we really, if we haven't experienced something ourselves, we really underweigh it. So I think, we're seeing it right now with COVID with some
Yeah.
people actually. People who know people are often, they understand the risks. They're like, okay, you need to wear a mask. This is important. But then you have parts of the country that weren't affected with the first wave or weren't affected a lot. And they're like, oh, this is a hoax. This is stupid. I don't need to worry about it because I personally don't know anyone.
Mhm.
So I don't care about these statistics. I don't know what the R is. I don't know what, I don't care about any of those numbers. All I care about is that I'm fine and that everyone I know is fine.
Right.
Description versus experience.
That makes sense. The example you give in the book, I think, is 9/11, where people who were kind of around or paying attention to that, or maybe in New York for that, they're often much more scared of terrorism or a terror attack. And then other folks that are maybe a little bit more removed from it or just focus more on stats are going, look, the odds of anything happening on an airplane are this. And it's like, well, yeah, but I was in a almost plane crash one time, so I'm never getting on a plane again, which you don't really argue with people like that. Like,
Exactly.
it's hard to do that. Like, oh, yeah, you crashed in Africa in the bush that one time, but you're on a small plane. This is a commercial airliner. No, I'm just going to go, well, I'm not really going to argue with that. You almost died in a plane
Exactly. What are
crash.
you supposed to do? Like,
Right.
it's really hard because our experiences are emotional in a way that descriptions totally are not. Like, you are going to think that I'm just a horrible human being if you're telling me about, your crash experience. And I'm like, did you know that your risks of dying by slipping in a bathtub are actually orders of magnitude higher?
Right.
You'll be like, screw you.
You must be fun at parties. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Who are you? Like, yeah, exactly. The you must be fun at parties is the perfect put down line there. I've gotten it a lot at Twitter.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah.
But what I was going to say is that poker actually cures you a lot of that because you're sampling probabilities correctly. So you actually get to feel what 1% feels like, what 2% feels like. It's really cool. It's something that's really helped me internalize different things that I now see on the news. I can actually think back in my mind, oh, well, that's about equal to the probability of hitting a pair on the flop. Okay, I know what that is.
Yeah,
Like
interesting.
I can feel it.
That is fascinating because I wondered if you brought poker thinking into your daily life and you're like, oh, this is like what is it, a capped range or something like that. I don't even know I don't know
Yes.
nothing about this. But yeah.
Yes, capped range is a great concept to actually use in real life. A capped range, all it means is that given what this person has done, they're capped at how strong they can be. So basically, if you know that someone always raises, if we're talking poker, always raises their strongest hands, so like aces and kings, they're always going to raise them before the flop 100% of the time, and they didn't. They're capped. They can't possibly have those hands. So the best hand they can have is something that's going to be worse than that. And so that helps you eliminate certain hands from their range. If you apply that correctly to life, you can actually save yourself a lot of woe and realize when people are trying to bluff you, you're like, wait, if you actually were going to walk away from this negotiation, you would have acted this way and this way. So you're capped. You're not going to walk away from this. The way you've acted caps your range of actions, caps what you actually are bringing to the situation. It's a really good way of analyzing, like, okay, how would this person have acted if they in fact have what they're representing versus not? And it's also good to know that for yourself so that you can try to avoid those inconsistencies yourself so that you don't have to go, oh shit, I would have played that differently.
I use this in negotiation where I'll collect a huge amount of information, and a lot of friends of mine who are also in business, they'll go, look, man, you're just psyching yourself out by getting all this extra information. But what I'm looking for a lot of the time is something, and I never thought about it this way, but it's something that would cap the range. So for example, maybe the other party says, look, we don't need to sell this to you, but I already got information from another party that has nothing to do with our negotiation that says, yeah, we just bought 3 million impressions for this sponsor from this network. And I go, they need me to fill in like 1 million of those. They actually really need me a lot right now. And it's between me and another show that this other person said they already signed with their network, so they can't get them. They want me to think I'm competing, but I'm not really.
It's so you actually also just hit on something that is such a crucial thing to realize, and that poker actually helped me realize, but you can learn it away from the table, and it really applies. Information is power.
Yeah.
Everything is a game of information. If I can get an informational edge on you, if I can know something that you don't, or that you don't know that I know, then all of a sudden my advantage has just quintupled. So here you actually were able to get an informational advantage, and they did not know. They actually didn't realize that you were good at doing your research.
Yeah.
And that's just so important. It's like why when you actually pick up a tell on a person, which is very rare. So when you actually figure out, oh, wow, they do this when they're strong, or they do this when they're bluffing, or whatever it is. And if you can actually do that, you can't tell anyone, because the moment this person is aware that you know this, it stops working. Right. So
That's
you
interesting.
actually
You
have to keep your information to yourself.
The description experience gap is essentially what leads us to believe what we want to see, not what the research shows. So again, we don't look at the stats, we go on almost like a feeling. That then sabotages our perception, or at least the results of our perception, where we start to believe things that we kind of wish were there.
Yeah, it's actually, that's a really, really interesting question, and it's a really nuanced question. So you're getting at something that psychologists have tried to tease apart for a long time. Do you actually see the world differently?
Right.
Or and I think the answer is yes, because I think that you just selectively focus on the on the information that already agrees with what you want to believe. So this is called the confirmation bias. So you think you're looking at everything objectively, but actually you're only looking at the information that agrees with you, and you're not even seeing really. You're just completely discounting the information that doesn't. So if you did like a Google search and the first hit agrees with you, you're like, I'm done.
Right.
And you didn't look at anything else. Now, if you see the first hit disagrees with you, then you'll start doing more research and finding the ones that agree with you.
This sounds like conspiracy theorists that are like, oh yeah, well, Google is mainstream media now. You can't even go on YouTube. You got to go on BitChute and then watch Plandemic, where they, and then it's like, well, yeah, okay. Now you're just looking for things that reinforce your argument. This isn't what research really is, but people don't know that. Right.
Yep,
okay,
that's exactly right.
That does explain quite a bit. You mentioned that when you were going into poker, that the job market was actually the risky play, but with poker, it's more meritocratic. Can you tell us about this?
So because I was originally, I'd never intended to go on the academic job market, but I could have, right? That's what happens after you get your PhD. You kind of go on the job market, you interview at different universities, and someone decides whether or not they want you to teach there, to be a professor there. And it's very competitive. And people think, especially my grandmother, but people think that academia is just this really respectable, meritocratic thing, the smart people, and that poker is just like degen gambling.
Yeah.
However, there is so much bullshit politics in academia. When you go on the job market, you are so subject to the prejudices of the people doing the hiring. Do they like the person who was your advisor and who's on your dissertation committee? Do they agree with the kind of research you do or not? And by the way, you can actually, this doesn't have to be academia. This can be any kind of job market, right? Does the person like the person you used to work for? And do they like what you used to, what you're studying? Does it actually mesh with their view or not? Maybe they're doing something that actually kind of goes in a slightly different direction. And so they're like, oh, don't hire Maria. She's actually horrible. I think she's a horrible worker. And it's not true, but they say that because they want to protect their little area, and so they don't want me to be hired.
I don't want somebody whose research says that I might be wrong in some way, possibly, because then it furthers their career. Yeah,
exactly. And then there are also the things like, oh, was the person interviewing me the day they were interviewing me? Were they just getting over the flu and they just didn't want to be there? And so they're completely not receptive to what I'm saying. Or did they already see a candidate that they loved? And so even though they might have loved me more had I gone first, I didn't go first. And so I never have a chance to prove myself. And they've already kind of decided.
Right. They were hungry when they interviewed you.
Exactly. Yeah. What if I remind someone of their ex-wife? And they're like, oh my God, like,
I can't work with her every day.
Exactly. And they probably don't even think of it consciously. They probably think that this is like, that they're being totally objective, but these biases operate on a subconscious level. So at the end of the day, it is completely not meritocratic. It's all about knowing the right people, doing the right work, kind of being in the right moment at the right time. Poker, on the other hand, especially tournament poker, if you can afford the buy-in, great. No
Mhm.
one cares where the hell you went to school. No one cares what you look like. No one cares what you did or didn't do. They're not allowed to say, unless you've been banned from the property for cheating or something like that. But assuming that there's no law enforcement reason why you can't play, they can't say you can't play. And you, as I write in the book, you rise and fall on your own merits. So there are people sitting at the table, some of whom have Ivy League educations, others of whom dropped out of high school and, had to wrestle with homelessness and all sorts of issues and built up their bankroll from $10 and ended up being so good that they took that $10 and are now millionaires.
That's amazing.
It is. And that's the only place that I've actually found where that's true. Now, like I said, nothing's a perfect meritocracy, right? So it obviously matters where you were born, who you are. Some people don't even get to figure out that they like to play poker or that they're good at it. It obviously helps to have some parental support. A lot of these things are helpful.
Yeah, there's
but
still
then,
privilege involved.
of course, there's still
somehow.
privilege involved.
And luck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Always. But it's the most meritocratic thing I've ever seen.
That to me is interesting, coming from people, as a person who looks at poker and says, well, gambling is pure luck. And then we're saying, well, actually, it's more skill. And then this area that it requires all the skill is actually more meritocratic than, say, academia, which theoretically is supposed to be meritocratic. That's like the whole, the word probably comes from that somewhere. Merits is probably some academic word that I don't know from Greece. I don't know. It's probably
likewise. I also do not know those words.
But when you think merit, you think medal, award, achievement, accolade. Like all of that is usually associated with the centers of learning, which now you're saying are not as meritocratic as sitting around a table with a bunch of guys jeering at you for being a woman and you kicking their ass because you have better skill.
Yep.
Yeah. That to me is kind of cool, right?
I have a one-word answer to that.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll get to some of that later, maybe. The best poker players don't take things personally, you said. They also know how to take lessons from their losses instead of looking to blame someone else. Well, that's a skill I think people need in life because we have to do the same thing. Otherwise, I do find that a lot of people, and I'm sure we all have this friend or had this friend, who everything is someone else's fault. Therefore, they can never grow. I've had people like that in my business. I've had business partners like that still years later are, Jordan screwed us over, and that's why we're not doing well. And I'm like, I started from 0 2.5 years ago again, and I'm doing better. So like, wait a second, what's going on here? They spend a lot of time blaming others. I spend a lot of time analyzing mistakes and analyzing my mistakes in business rather than looking for someone to blame. And that was a lesson that was sort of hard won for me, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's hard one for a lot of people. And I think it's also something that one has to constantly work at because it's very easy to fall back into bad thought habits and to start blaming other people. I remember reading these psych studies about basically you had to work in a group and the researcher would rig the results so that you were told that, your group didn't perform as well. And then you had to kind of explain what happened. And inevitably everyone would say, oh, I worked really hard. It was my other group members who dragged us down. And there was no correlation, actually. It was just completely rigged, but people just blamed other people. Oof. And every single person in the group was like, I was the hard worker and everyone else is a slacker. And they found this result so many times. But yeah, in poker, it's such an important lesson to just realize that nothing is personal. You have to put your ego out of the equation. Sometimes someone will, raise you 3 times and you'll be like, oh my God, that person's picking on me. And maybe they are, but maybe they've had good hands and maybe that's just good strategy because you've been folding. It's not personal. It has nothing to do with you. They're just a good player. So rather than complain and be like, oh, I can't believe that person's bullying me, fight back.
Yeah.
Be like, okay, fine. I'm going to re-raise and see what happens. Like, I'm going to try to adjust. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on because this isn't personal. And the moment you start taking it personally, your decisions just go haywire. Logic goes out the window. All of a sudden, you're shoving all your chips in the middle with 7-deuce offsuit, which is the worst hand you can be dealt in poker because you got mad at this guy who keeps raising you. And you're like, oh, I'm going to take a stand. Fine. I have 7-deuce. I don't care. Yeah. I'm all in. And he flips over aces and you're like, oh shit.
That's called going on tilt, right?
That is called going on tilt. Isn't that a beautiful expression?
It kind of is. Where does that come from, though? Is it like tilting a game machine, maybe, right?
Yeah, it comes from pinball.
I've seen
it
that
actually
on
comes
pinball
from
machines.
pinball. Yeah. So in pinball, you can tilt the machine right away, and sometimes pinball machines, after people started doing that, would have tilt protection,
Yeah.
so that you actually can't do that. It disqualifies you from the game if you try to do that. And I don't actually play pinball, so I'm not quite sure how it works. But I'm guessing that people who play pinball realize, yeah,
There's a mercury switch in there, and if you move the machine, it just usually just blinks and then turns off, or it'll buzz or something like that.
I see. So
and
they
turn off.
probably actually did that in response to people tilting the machines.
Yeah, because if you flatten out the machine, you can
Yeah.
just have it bounce wherever you want,
Yeah.
and you'll never lose, and then you can jack the high score up, which sucks for everybody competing
Yeah.
against you.
There you go. So that's where the term comes from. But in poker, it means getting emotional and letting emotions get into your decision process. And that comes from taking things personally and not realizing that, it's not personal. I have to actually just look at the process dispassionately and make the best decision I can. So you can go on tilt. You can be tilted. Someone can be tilting to you.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful word. You can use it in so many ways. Oh my God, isn't that person's haircut so tilting?
It's like
you can use it that
triggering.
way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's funny. This is another concept that I've found myself using and never had a term for. I was recently in a lawsuit ended back in March, lasted forever. But one of the things we were able to do, unfortunately, the other party wasn't acting in good faith. They were always trying to mess everything up. And I was like, okay, well, if this person's not going to get a real agreement, what we can do, if we can't predict that they are going to act in their own best interest, what I can do is predict that I can make them super angry and that they'll make bad decisions. And so I just started to do that. And
well done.
Yeah, they were on tilt.
That's a great skill. That's a great skill. To be able to tilt someone is quite a skill. And I've had it used against me. And I had to work on it. And I think it's really important to realize that every single person can tilt. Right? There's no one who's so just sanguine and chill that nothing gets to them. There is something that will tilt you at some point, or someone, because you play for, the days are long. You're sitting at the table for like 12, 13, 14 hours long, and then you have to wake up in the morning and do it again if you're doing tournament poker. It's exhausting. And when you're exhausted, when your resources are depleted cognitively and emotionally, things start getting to you more, right? You don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. You don't have the emotional resilience to deal with it. And so even if you're someone who's normally super chill, when you're going on hour 13 and you haven't gotten any sleep and you haven't eaten that much, believe me, things are going to start affecting you.
Sure.
And so it's so important to try to figure out what your triggers are. What are the things that put you on tilt? How do you respond to certain common situations? How do you respond if you suddenly lose several large hands in a row and find that you've gone from like chip leader to shortest stack? How do you respond in those situations? It's important in advance to know the answer to that so that you have a way to solve it in the moment, because in the moment you ain't gonna solve it. You're just gonna make a bad decision.
That's interesting. I did an interview years ago with Phil Hellmuth, who's kind of famous for just freaking out at the table.
Yes, the poker brat.
Yes, the poker brat. And it's weird because I thought, we better be nice. Like, we're going to his house. We don't want him to get mad. He was so calm, chill, nice. It was like not what I expected at all. He's a very positive thinker.
Yeah. He's very different in his personal life than he is at the poker table.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you got a mental coach to sort of rein in your tiltage. What was going on there? How did that work? What did they teach you?
Yeah. So his name was Jared Tendler, and he's great. And he actually he started out working with athletes. So he's someone who used to coach professional athletes, still does, but expanded to poker players, because poker is a sport of a kind. It's a mind sport, but it also requires a lot of physical stamina and good habits of, hygiene and mind and body. So just like for any athletic competition, this is an endurance sprint.
Yeah.
So he basically, at first I didn't think that I needed him. He reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, I heard you're working on this book project. let me know if you want to talk. And I
Mhm.
looked him up and I was like, oh, great credentials. I don't need a mental coach. I've got a PhD in psychology. I'm great. And I'm female. I don't have, I don't have the testosterone swings. I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
it's those guys
Must
that
be
need it.
nice. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the guys that need it. I don't need it. And oh my God, talk about hubris, right? Talk
Yeah.
about being a little bit overconfident. It ends up I did need a mental coach, as I found out after going on tilt a few times. And so the way that it worked was, we would have these hour-long sessions where we would talk, and he would actually get me to go through different play sessions where I could identify different things that, made me emotional that I might not have even realized at the time. And it wasn't just even like, oh, this kind of person makes me go on tilt. It was also the types of things like, just when is my decision making off?
Hmm.
And there were situations like, I know what the right decision is, but somehow I can't find that aggression. And so I can't run the bluff when I need to. And so I just
Interesting.
fold. What is it? What's holding me back? What are my hangups? What's going on in my head? So he really forced me to identify those, to dig deep. I would make Excel spreadsheets for him where I would like write down, okay, trigger. This is where it's coming from. This is how I'm going to work on it. This is what I'm going to do in the moment. And it seemed like total BS when I was doing it, but it helped because it actually forced me to do the work and to identify these moments and to then have a game plan, because it's so important to understand that you can't develop a game plan in the moment. You need to have thought of it ahead of time. Otherwise, there's just too much going on and you're not going to be able to execute.
He brought the concept of incidental events and how they affect our actions negatively, even if they shouldn't. The example you give is this weather example. Can you take us through that? Because I thought this was fascinating, actually. I bet this happens to me every day and I just don't even know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the weather example is a really, really famous study in psychology by Schwartz and Clore. And it's called the effect is called mood as information.
Okay.
So we use our mood, how we're feeling, and we use that to actually make totally unrelated decisions. So in the weather study, this was really cool. They called a bunch of people and asked how they were doing that day. That's it. But the way that they did it was they actually looked at zip codes and tried to figure out what the weather was in that area at that exact moment when they called. And so they picked some people where the weather was really sunny and others where it was raining or just overcast and pretty depressing. And they found that the weather totally affected the ratings of how well someone was doing and how, what they felt like, whether they were actually satisfied or not with their life, just all of these mood ratings. But if they asked someone first, so what's the weather like there? And then they asked the question, the effect disappeared. So as soon as you actually drew their attention to where their mood was coming from, they discounted it. So it was a really powerful study because it shows that we make decisions and incorporate things that really shouldn't matter all the time, like the weather, right? We don't realize that we're depressed because it's raining outside, and instead we're like, oh, life sucks, everything sucks. And we even make bad decisions when it comes to financial decisions. There's a related study that shows that traders actually, that the stock market goes down on overcast days oftentimes.
Huh.
And that if your sports team loses, you oftentimes will once again crash the market. And it's so interesting to see those types of things that don't matter at all. But the guys on the trading floor, they're looking at the sports team. They care about the sports. And when your team loses, all of a sudden that's bad and it affects your mood, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also, so that part is a little bit concerning, but it's so cool that if you draw someone's attention to the incidentals, to the reason why they're feeling this way, then they're totally capable of discounting it and saying, oh, okay, yeah, I'm depressed right now, but it's because of the weather. So yeah, I think life is generally pretty good.
Is that one of the reasons why you're told never play straight off the plane when you get to the tournament or Vegas? Like jet lag, you're hungry, you're tired. There's probably even other
Yeah.
things going on. I don't know. Dehydrated.
Absolutely. That's one of the rules that my coach had for me. And now I'm talking again about Eric Seidel.
Yeah.
Never play off of a plane because you don't realize how compromised your decision making is. You've just traveled. You're probably in a different time zone, so your body hasn't adjusted. You're not well rested. You're not in the right mindset. You haven't had the right things to eat. Your body's just totally not ready. And in order to play your best game, in order to maximize your edge, you need to be the best version of you, which is a you who has eaten well, a you who has slept, a you who's on local time. And I think it's such important advice for anything that, if you're flying somewhere for a job interview, try to get there a day in advance so that you actually have a chance to acclimate a little and get your head straight
Mm-hmm.
and not go straight from the plane to the interview. We never do that. I mean, it's
Yeah, of course.
you just go straight from the plane to the interview. But it would be so helpful if you did.
You mentioned that there's a parallel between poker and in your writing, and that characters need to have motivations in writing. I was not good at writing when I was in college, so I assume you mean like characters in novels and things like that. Same in poker. Every player is telling a story consciously or unconsciously, and you finding out why these characters, aka your opponents or other people playing with you, do things, why they act the way they did, that has some sort of value in the game, as long as you can get the story but not judge, is what you'd said. Can you explain this?
So a lot of times, we tend to just judge people. There's a joke in poker. I'm going to move up in stakes to where they respect my raises because I say, that player sucks. He doesn't respect my raises. He's never going to fold. And some people actually say that and they're not joking. They're serious. And something that one of the people that I got to know very well and worked with quite a bit throughout this journey taught me, Phil Galfond, was it's so important to figure out everyone's motivations and the reason behind every single person's decisions. What he said is always ask why. So he said two things. One, everyone is telling you stories, and figure out what doesn't make sense. Figure out where do the story pieces not fall together, because that's how you're going to figure out whether they're making sense or not, whether they're bluffing or not. But then he said, this is true of everyone. Do not be that person who's saying, I'm going to move up in stakes to where they respect my raises. Do not be judgmental. Do not say, oh, that person's just an idiot. They're stupid. They don't know what they're doing. Instead, try to figure out, why are they doing what they're doing? Because even bad players have a reason for doing what they're doing. They're not just randomly doing it. And if they're doing it just randomly because they just want to, that's also a reason. And if you can understand that, then you can take advantage of it. And not being judgmental is actually to your advantage, to your bottom line advantage, not just as I'm not a judgmental person, but it will help you. You will become a better player because you will understand that you can't look down at anyone. Everyone is a part of this. Everyone's a part of the ecosystem. And if you're looking down at everyone, that probably means that there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, that's interesting. That certainly rings true. You must spend a lot of time reading people, and I think a lot of folks are like, I hope they talk about reading people and tells and things like that. I want to start, though, with online poker, because I know you played a lot online to just get a feel for the game with maybe the people element removed, but that didn't quite work out because you still have to read people in online poker, which I found fascinating. They're not even there.
Yeah, I found that fascinating too. I found it so interesting that we can actually make judgments about people based on how they're playing online. And this is a multi-tiered process. First, usually online you get to choose your screen name and you get to choose your avatar. So already that says something about the person. Then there's a chat function and some people choose to use it and some people are not very nice in it. And right away, that also tells you something about the person. And oftentimes I'll see all these people in the chat after they've had a bad beat being like, oh, you're sucking out again, blah, blah, and they'll just go on a rant. Well, that just told me so much about your emotional reactions, about how you process information. And then there are the tells that are things like, oh, this person sometimes bets this amount and sometimes that amount, and they bet more when they have a stronger hand, or vice versa. And if you learn to look at those things, you can actually see how people are acting. Yeah, you can't see their gestures, but you can see things like that. You can see how long they take. Sometimes they act right away. Sometimes they'll take 10 seconds. Sometimes they'll use their time bank. what do all of these things mean? Those timing tells can be really important. So you end up being able to build a pretty interesting composite picture of a person. And I wouldn't give people labels. The first big tournament I won online was was courtesy of someone who I had labeled AIA, which was aggressive idiot asshole, because I'd played against him before, and not only was he an asshole to me, but he was an aggressive idiot. So hence the label.
Yeah.
And it was true, and it actually informed how I played against him. And so I just let him bluff all of his chips off to me because I knew that he would want to try to bully me. And he did. And that gave me the lead I needed to end up winning the tournament. So I thank him in the book. I say thank you to the aggressive idiot asshole.
It is fascinating because a lot of us, are, of course, now, especially that everyone's working remotely, we are dealing with a lot of people online and in chats and in email, which we were before. But now a lot of that human element is removed from pretty much everything. I mean, you thought you had a lot of conference calls before COVID-19. Like, what's going on now? Everything has context removed. So learning to read people without being in front of them is a skill in itself. How does that differ from reading people live at the poker table primarily? I mean, there's obviously more body language, but
yeah, live you just have a lot more information because it's not you do have the body language, and as I write about in my book, pay attention to hands.
Mm-hmm.
Hands are where it's at. It's not the poker face, it's the poker hands. That's where you actually give off most of your information. But anyway, so live you have that, but you also have the dynamics. So you start seeing, and yes, you have a little bit of this online, but it's much richer live. You can see who is being annoyed by whom, who likes whom, like who's trying to prove that, they're more macho than the other guy. You can start seeing those behavioral dynamics start emerging. And if you're good at spotting those, if you're good at seeing where the energy is at the table and how the energy is shifting and where there's bad energy, that really helps you. All of a sudden you can take advantage of it. And that's something that's much easier to do live. I like live poker a lot better. I think it's much more interesting. I think it's a lot more fun. I enjoy playing with people and reading people, and I enjoy those interactions. And on the computer, it's a different world.
Yeah. It sort of seems like it's like watching a movie on your phone versus going to a theater. Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good comparison here.
No, I mean, I think that's not a bad comparison. I think it's even more extreme than that. But
Sure.
It's very true, because you do want something where you are interacting with people. I mean, it's like having Zoom happy hour instead of actually
a real
going,
happy hour. Yeah.
Going to a real happy hour where everyone has their drink and is saying hi. It's better than nothing.
That's true.
But you'd prefer the real thing. So online poker for me is better than nothing, but I'd prefer the real thing.
I guess maybe a better comparison would have been watching a sports game on your phone versus going and sitting at the court side
that's a very good one,
NBA.
because the fans, there's so much energy there.
Right.
And it's so funny to me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I've been thinking a lot about how interesting it is that a lot of the sporting events now that don't have audiences will actually have audience noise. So that
I wondered that they were going to do that. I thought, okay, are they going to add the proverbial laugh track, but it's going to be like a cheer track?
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
So they've been doing that. They started doing that in Europe. And to me, it's just, wow.
Yeah.
Because I guess that it must affect the players as well. But it's so interesting.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. I guess they just blast it over the sound system, and then the players look around and go, oh, right, there's no one here.
I saw a story yesterday about an opera in Spain, and they had filled the opera house with plants. So instead of an audience, there were plants, and then they streamed the opera. It was this surreal thing. You see this huge auditorium filled with plants. So I just imagined a sports stadium with plants.
Imagine how much work that would be to move a plant to every other seat. The air must be fantastically fresh in there, though.
It must be.
Yeah.
It must be. I did think it's so funny that that's what you thought. That was my first reaction too. I was like, "Whoa, who moved all these plants?"
Yeah.
In here?
Well, think about it. I'm moving right now, right? So to another house. So lifting these plants, I'm like, oh, how many plants do we have? This is so irritating. Dirt is heavy. So imagine
dirt is really heavy,
and I have like 8 plants. Okay, I don't have 800 or 8,000 plants for a stadium. That's a whole lot of dirt, and well, whatever. Maybe they can leave them there for another year, and it'll be worth it. Who knows? You did mention the hands, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
people are thinking poker hand, like the cards you have, but you meant actual
I meant actual
physical
physical hands.
hands. Tell us
Yeah.
about the new science of hand movement here. This is really incredible.
So it ends up that we actually give off a lot of information from our hands. And it makes sense. Think about where your pulse is. Right?
Sure.
Think about if you sweat, what part of your body sweats. So we're used to controlling our faces. Everyone is used to the poker face idea, but we're really not used to controlling our hands. That's not something we pay attention to nearly as much. And so we don't have as much practice at it. There was a really cool study that was done on poker players at the World Series of Poker, where this researcher at Columbia, Michael Slepian, had people who knew nothing about poker. It didn't really matter. You could know something or not. He had them watch videos of the World Series, and what he asked them to do was say who has a strong hand. And there were 3 different videos. One was a totally unaltered video where you just saw, the poker table and everything above it. So that's above the waist for anyone who's never seen televised poker. So you see faces, arms, hands, the whole deal. Then he did one cut where you could just see above the shoulders. So you were only looking at the face. And then he did one cut that was just kind of a little bit below the chest. So you could basically just see the hands and arms and what was going on at the table. It turns out that the people who could see everything were about at chance levels, which makes sense because we're about 50-50 at being able to tell if someone's deceiving us or not.
Sure.
So study after study shows that it's about a coin flip. So that makes sense. When they just looked at the faces, it actually screwed them up. They were looking at the wrong thing. So they became worse at chance at figuring out if someone had a strong hand or not, because they were looking at the wrong facial cues. Because people will look at a face and be like, oh, that person looks trustworthy. You don't think of it consciously, but subconsciously that's going on. And so people were just screwing up. They were looking at the facial features and not at what they were supposed to. And so they were worse than chance. But when they just looked at the hands, all of a sudden their success rate went way up and they could tell if someone had a strong hand, even if they didn't know anything about poker, just by the way that they handled their chips and the way they handled their cards and the way they placed their bets in the middle. And so Slepian said, wow, there's something in the gestures. And he thought in the smoothness and the fluidity. So people who are strong and actually confident, as opposed to pretending to be confident, move differently. And to me, that was so interesting. And afterwards, I was like, whoa, I'm just going to stare at everyone's hands now.
Yeah, just going to look at everyone's hands. And I'm sure there's plenty to be gained by that. Did you find any success with that, or is that sort of new?
Yes, I did. It's totally fascinating that it actually works. Not always, because so basically what I worked with a coach who helped me on my tells as well. So I tried to get a coach for as many things as I could.
Yeah, don't blame me.
Coaches are good.
Yes.
Coaches are good. They help you. And he just basically told me, stop doing things with your hands. Do not put just try to minimize what you're doing. So do not put like a card protector on your cards. Always check your cards the same way and then leave your cards the same way. Like, don't recheck them. Don't do this. Don't play with your chips. Always place your bet out the same way. Just be very mindful of that. But most people don't do that. You see all the time people riffling chips. And well, that's a hand gesture.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, the riffling chips is where you sort of do some sort of fancy chip game, whatever. Yeah.
And sometimes what you don't realize is when you're thinking, your rhythm's going to be interrupted a little bit because there's cognitive load. And so things like that happen. And it's so interesting to see. And sometimes people don't realize that they bet one way when they have a good hand and another way when they don't. And when they are playing before the flop, so before any cards whatsoever, that's the time when people are least guarded because there's really no money in the pot yet. So they're
so it's early, so they're not trying to hide anything. Yeah, it's early,
so they're not trying to hide as much. It's so interesting to observe how people will raise. And sometimes they'll raise like, oh, I don't really care. And sometimes they'll raise like, this is a real raise.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that means different things.
Sure.
And once you can, and it's so interesting to see, and it's so interesting to realize that this is actually taking place. And like I said, not always, not for everyone, but it's there.
That to me is very fascinating because it shows what it says about nonverbal tells. And tell me if I'm wrong. This is your department after all. But what it says about nonverbal tells is we not only can we not turn these off? But it's not just about lying with our body or like wearing a hat and sunglasses. It's about giving people as little information as we can so they can't develop maybe a baseline. And you mentioned in the book that Eric,
Yes.
your coach, Eric Seidel, never showed his cards after a hand because he wanted to keep, I assume because he wanted to keep information from others so they couldn't use
Yes.
game tape and go, aha, when he has good cards, he does this. And when he has bad cards, he does it. Now he can't do that anymore. But
Yes.
yeah.
Now he can't do that, but at the beginning he was infamous for this. People were really mad at him. He didn't want to show his whole cards to the camera in the earliest days of televised poker. And that was because he didn't want to show his strategy. Information is power. And because Eric doesn't actually care about being famous, he didn't care whether or not he was invited back. He didn't care if he was on TV. Like, you want me? Fine. I don't want to show my cards. And these days you can't. So
Right.
these days it's just not a choice. You sign a little thing before you start if there's a televised table that you're going to obey the rules,
Yeah.
basically, which means showing your cards. And that part never really hurt him because he's so good at changing his strategy around. But it was one of these things where it makes sense. What we talked about earlier, information is power.
Mm-hmm.
The more information you have, the better. The less information they have, the
Right.
better. So both in terms of how you play hands and also in terms of how you hold yourself, what you do. Just give people as little to go on as possible. That's why I discourage people when they talk about, oh, well, what about speech play? You know, I want to try to get them to tell me what they have, so I'm going to engage in banter. And if you watch televised poker, you see a lot of people trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
My advice is just don't speak during a hand, because chances are, unless you're really, really, really good at it, you're going to give off more information than you're going to pick up.
Is that why you don't wear a hat and sunglasses or anything like that? I've heard you mention that you
Yes.
don't do that.
I don't wear anything. And I think, yes, because I think you do give off potentially more information than you pick up, because it's so funny. And I'm going to say these things and then players will realize that they do them and they'll stop doing them and I'll hate myself.
Right.
But they'll do things like they'll put their glasses on at certain moments and during certain hands, and then they'll take them off. And you should have to start paying attention to when they're wearing them and when they're not wearing them. And they'll do things with their hat, when they're serious versus not serious. It's so funny. And I don't think they're consciously aware.
Sure.
And maybe some of them, if they become aware because someone told them, they're going to try to mix it up on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But then inevitably they'll go back to their baseline.
Right. It only works like
do.
one time and then it's like, okay, yeah. Or it looks very manual. So you lose more information than you hide when you wear a hat or sunglasses.
Exactly. And you give off more information.
Right. Okay.
But I think, but also, have you ever worn sunglasses inside in a not particularly bright room?
Of course. Yeah. When you walk in from taking a walk or something and you go, oh, I'm still wearing my sunglasses.
Right. Can you see as well as you can without your
sunglasses? Of course not. Yeah, of course not. Especially if your eyes have to adjust.
It seems like a silly question, but I never get it. Like, you're wearing dark glasses inside. You're going to miss stuff. You're just not going to see things as well.
Yeah, you have blind spots and stuff on them.
Exactly. If you don't have the damn glasses on. So I think it's so stupid.
But
Sorry, people.
That's okay. Of course. Yeah. Look, that's their choice. You do use noise canceling headphones though. So you don't want to hear, you just want to see.
Well, I often actually have them not turned on.
Oh.
It's a way of choosing which conversations I'm involved in. So think about a normal poker table. It's going to be, if we're playing 8-handed poker, it's going to be like 7 guys, a lot of them pretty big, and me.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone wants to like pick a conversation and someone doesn't respond and that someone's one of the huge guys, what are they going to do? Nothing. They'll move on. But if I don't respond, they'll be like, hey, I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
Why are you responding? Like, what? You're too good for me? Like, all of a sudden, because there's the gender dynamic, and they feel like they can do that. And there's this just social pressure. And sometimes I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to engage because they're annoying me or whatnot. And so putting on those headphones before you even sit down, it just gives you personal space, because now it's socially acceptable to pretend you didn't hear them. So you can actually either have them on and pretty low so that you can still hear everything, because I think it is important to hear things, or you can just have them off. But having them on your ears just gives you that space, gives you the option to just pretend you don't hear. And so they can't be like, hey, I'm talking to you. You can be like,
Yeah, yeah. I don't
don't know what
expect a
you're saying.
reply. I've got these noise canceling headphones
Yep.
on. And then the pressure's on them because it's almost like you want me to take my headphones off so I can hear
Yep.
you say some dumb, inconsequential thing. No,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So it switches the dynamic.
Yeah, it puts the monkey on their back to like try hard for your attention, which means that it's just easier to go with the path of least resistance, which is either not to bother you or to bother somebody else or both.
Exactly.
All right. Did you have to learn to be more aggressive? And was that strange for you as this might sound unwoke, but as a woman with certain social
Yeah.
conditioning growing up, maybe you're not
It doesn't
aggressive.
sound unwoke at all. And it's something that I definitely had to work on and that I realized about myself. I realized that, I have really internalized a lot of gender stereotypes
Mhm.
because we live in a male dominated society. So you kind of have to, if you want to do well, you have to pay attention and figure out, okay, how do I adjust my behavior so that everything is okay
Mhm.
and so that I do well. And I had always thought, oh, I know all about gender biases. I've studied the psychology of it.
Sure.
I've written about it. Like I'm good. I'm a strong female. No, that was such delusional bullshit. It turns out that I had internalized so much of it, and I'd find myself sometimes with like the best hand possible, and I wasn't being aggressive with it. Like I
Mm.
was just calling. I wasn't raising too much because I wanted people to think I was nice. I wanted them to like me.
Oh, no.
I didn't want them to be like, "What's that bitch like who keeps raising me?"
Yeah.
And so
Respect
even
my
when I
raise. Yeah.
Exactly. So even when I had good hands, I wouldn't win as much money. And then when I didn't have the best hand, I'd just fold. I'd be like, you know what? You just take it. You just take the pot. I don't want any conflict. That is not a good way to play poker.
No, but people did like you because you gave them a lot of money. Yeah.
Yes, they did. They loved me. They wanted me in their games always. But because I was losing money, it forced me to actually deal with this. It forced me to realize, hey, there's an issue here. There's a problem. I have to work on this. And so Eric, from the very beginning, just was so he really stressed the need to up my aggression and to work with me on how I could use my image, which is a female,
Yeah.
to be able to get away with things.
There you
Said,
go.
okay, look at you. Like you're a girl. You're not as intimidating as these other people. Look at the other people at the table. Look at you. Coming from you, this is going to seem very different than coming from that guy. So learn to use your image, learn how to flip it on its head, learn how to use the fact that people are underestimating you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a while before I could follow that advice, but once I did, it actually helped me use the gender dynamics to my advantage rather than letting them bully me over.
Yeah.
Because so poker's 97% male, 3% female in any given field. And that's about right. And it's been constant that way for a very long time. And so normally you're the only girl, you're the only female. And so once you figure out what your hangups are and how people are seeing you and if they're underestimating you and if so how, then you can just change your behavior completely. If they think that, I'm not capable of bluffing, that I'm someone who's not capable of aggression, all right, like now I
Yeah.
can actually bluff a lot more.
That's a good point.
So it just depends. Once I figured that out, I could really up the aggression more comfortably, use it to my advantage, and start winning instead of bleeding chips because I didn't want people to think that I wasn't a nice person.
When we thin slice people, our inputs are often wrong. I think I took that from your book. I'm not sure if that's an exact quote, but you're mentioning, look, we look at things like facial expressions and our own experience, but our own experience pretty much has nothing to do with our current circumstances most of the time. I mean, the person with tattoos who looks like somebody who we think is scary from high school because they yelled at us when we walked by their gas station, or like from the movies, this guy looks like the bad guy from that movie that I used to watch. That has nothing to do with reality. That doesn't make them a more aggressive poker player, right? This is some Malcolm Gladwell type ish right here, I guess. But
no, this is very true. I mean, what we need to realize is that every single one of us is biased. I mean, it's just the way that the human mind works. You form impressions of people right away the second you see them. And the second you see them, you don't know them yet. You don't know anything about them. So your impressions are necessarily based on things that don't necessarily correlate to who this person is. And so it will be things like, tattoos and biceps in my case, where I was like, oh, this guy's going to be an aggressive maniac. I'm not going to let him run me over. And it ends up that he was like the most conservative player ever. And I made some very stupid mistakes. But you need to recognize that you are going to have these biases. So just like people see me and think girl, I have to realize that I see them and I have certain impressions. You know, I see a nice older man and I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
he looks like my
hi,
grandpa. Yeah.
Exactly.
He steamrolls you.
Exactly.
Yeah, lies to
That's
your
what
face.
happened.
Oh, really?
That's exactly what happened. Yes. Nice little grandpa was like, ha ha ha, I'm going to bluff you. And then he turned over the bluff. And I was devastated that grandpa's bluffing me.
Was that the Siberian guy who's like, I spent
Yes.
all my money coming here from the
Yes.
Soviet Union. Oh, you're Russian too.
Yes.
And then he just smoked you.
Yep, that was him. He was a nice
Bastard.
little, yeah, exactly, bastard. He was a nice little grandpa looking guy. He had me take a picture of him for his grandson. I mean, the guy pulled out all the stops. Oh man, I'm such an idiot.
That seems extra dastardly somehow. Like do you think he went to everyone and planted this seed that he's like this cute little old guy just to like at one time during the tournament just steamroll them and blow them over?
It's very effective.
It worked. Yeah, I guess I shouldn't say it's extra dastardly. I mean, all is fair, I guess, right, in this game.
Yeah, and I was the idiot. I was the sucker. Look, that one's on me. I realized that, you know, that you have to learn to recognize what information is actually important and what isn't. And if I don't know anything about someone, well, how can I make that determination because they've told me they're from Siberia? That's not based on how they're playing. That's not correct data. That data should be totally irrelevant. It's like you and I were just talking about incidental emotion. That's incidental data. I shouldn't care what his eyebrows look like or what his jawline looks like or what his biceps look like or, you know, what age he is. I shouldn't care about any of that. I should care about observing his behavior at the table and seeing how he's acting and how he's reacting. That's what I should be focused on. But it's so hard. A lot of these things are so... You don't even realize how deeply ingrained they are.
You don't realize that you have the buttons that these people are pushing, right?
Because this is true.
For all you know, it's like, did I say Siberia? I meant Sacramento. Thanks for the photo.
Exactly.
Thanks for the photo and all that money. Yeah. Why don't you vent about bad beats and bad luck? I thought that was an interesting kind of rule for you because you see that all the time when you watch poker on TV. And I rarely do, but in the half an hour I've seen of poker in an airport lounge, all they did was whine, right? I mean, okay, it was Phil Hellmuth, but still. Yeah.
You must be fun at parties, right? Yeah. Going back to that.
Yeah.
But it was a rule that Eric Seidel set for me very early on when I tried to tell him a bad beat story. Mm-hmm. I was in the deepest I'd ever gotten into a tournament. So at this point, I had relocated to Vegas for a few months and was playing every day in these daily and nightly tournaments, you know, these silly little turbo things. But that's how I got my practice. That's how I learned to play live poker. And I finally made the final table and was almost about to get my first cash, my first tournament cash. And I was so excited. A cash is when you actually make money.
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise, you just pay the buy-in fee and bye-bye.
Right.
So I was that close, and I ended up flopping a set, which means that I'm holding a pair and there's a third card that matches my pair on the board, and that's huge. I mean, that's one of the best things that can happen. It's top set. I was ecstatic. I got all my money in, and it didn't work out. Yeah. Someone else ended up outdrawing me and I busted. And I was so upset. And so I ran to Eric and I started telling him this, and he just shut me up. He just said, "Wait, do you have a question about the hand?" And I said, "Well, no, you know, I had a set." He's like, "Then shut up. I don't want to hear it."
Huh.
And I was just, my jaw dropped open. I'm like, I'm your student. You're supposed to want to listen to my story.
Emotional support.
Yes, exactly. And he was like, "No, this is bad. There are always going to be those guys who tell you how their aces got cracked. You are not going to be that person. That is like putting your trash on somebody else's lawn." And I was like, "Oh, huh. I guess you have a point there." He's like, "I don't care because the outcome doesn't matter." And at that point, he actually made a deal with me that not only was I never going to tell him a bad beat, he never wanted to know how a hand ended. He did not care if I won or lost because that was irrelevant. That's noise. That's the outcome. That's what
Huh.
happens to the cards. He only cared about my decision process. So he only cared about the moments in the hand where I had a question. And then he doesn't care what the other guy has unless it's important, unless there's some reason why we care what the other guy has. And it was so, at that moment, it was infuriating because I wanted to tell him my bad
Yeah.
beat story.
Yeah.
But over time, I learned just how much of a gift he gave me, how liberating it was, because the bad beats, not only did I not weigh anyone else down with that trash, it wasn't toxic to me. I would just let it go. In not focusing on the outcome, I let go of the thing I just couldn't control. And so I started forgetting them. I actually would no longer remember when I was knocked out of a tournament unless it was an interesting hand. If it was a standard hand and I got my money in, well, fine. I'd forget the hand. So the only hands I started remembering were the ones that were interesting, where I could learn something. And that was such an important point in my development, because if you don't dwell on the shit that you can't control.
Right.
Figure out what you can do. Figure out what you are actually capable of changing.
Is this what Annie Duke calls resultsing, where if if it works out, you decide this was good for me. It's a little different, I guess, right? This is a little different, where you base whether or not you did it, whether your thought process was correct based on the outcome. But what it seems like you were being taught here, other than not to vent and get into that negative headspace, is also not to look at something and say, I did something wrong because it didn't work out. When in poker, there's that luck element that you shouldn't focus on.
Absolutely. No, it's a very similar concept. Absolutely. And I think that Annie's thinking in bets really does articulate it nicely. That you can't focus on the results. In fact, you should just dismiss the results, because the results are noise.
Yeah.
Unless if the results keep being bad over and over and over for a very long time, maybe you need to question your decision process.
That's right. Yeah.
Maybe there's something there. Maybe you're making some mistake over and over and over. So sometimes the results do matter, but in these types of situations, they don't. And I think it's also very important, not just with yourself, but when you're thinking about other people. So when you think, okay, does Mr. Smith make a good CEO, right? And we hire Mr. Smith because we did our work and we think he's going to be great. And then the company stock goes down within the year and we fire him. We're like, oh my God, we made a horrible mistake. Mr. Smith was awful because the company's not performing well. Well, maybe he was doing everything right. And he was actually a great CEO, but there were other elements going on, and we're judging him on the outcome and firing him before he has a chance to prove himself and to prove that his strategy is actually working. But you know what? Look at what's happening. Look at what's happening in the market in general. You know, all companies like this are going down because of this external factor that has nothing to do with the fact that he's your CEO or whatever it is. Because we even when we get over the hurdle of focusing on the outcome for ourselves, it's almost impossible to do it for other people. You know, if someone else fails, we're like, oh God, it's stupid. I can't believe they did that. Right? Or it's so easy to judge other people based on results because they're not you.
Yeah, right. We're emotionally divorced from this situation because it's not our money or whatever. And we're going, this guy, he doesn't know anything. And then 2 seconds later, make the exact same mistake because it's our money and it's our circumstances. Yeah. In the book, you've also said being genuinely interested in others' story is useful here. We can get to the why behind their actions, which is useful in terms of really understanding their motivations. This kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the English and the writing and the parallels here. But you said the biggest tells aren't physical, but psychological. That sounds kind of deep. Let's open that up a little bit if we can.
Yeah. I think that people often think that when you're talking about tells, you're talking about the things like we talked about earlier, hands or, you know, little motions.
Yeah.
And that's true.
Straightening my hat brim or whatever.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. But eating an Oreo. But
is that a thing that someone does?
No, just in the movie Rounders.
Oh, right. I was like, I've seen that. Where have I seen that? Right, Hollywood
Teddy KGB.
fiction.
Yes, you've seen it in Rounders. But oftentimes the most important tells are how someone is feeling and reacting, and if you can tell what their emotional state is. So this actually goes back to when we were talking about tilt. Can you figure out not just your own triggers, but the other person's triggers? Can you figure out, so for instance, almost everyone is going to have some sort of reaction to losing a lot or to winning a lot. Some people, when they lose a lot, they're going to become really cautious because they don't want to lose even more. Some people, when they lose a lot, are going to become extra reckless because they want to gain it back
Mm-hmm.
very, very quickly. Totally different, right? Same event, totally different reactions. Can I try to figure out what the psychological dynamic for this person is? How do they react to loss? Some people, when they win a lot, they're going to become extra cautious because now they don't want to lose it. They're like, oh, I have all these chips. I want to guard them. Other people, when they win a lot, they're like, yeah, let's push my advantage. Let's go. I'm on a roll. Let's do this thing. Which is this person?
Sure.
What's their dynamic? How do they react? And if you can start to figure out and pull apart things like that, all of a sudden you have a really good psychological picture of the person and you can take advantage of it. You can take advantage of them in the moments where their emotional equilibrium is off, when they're tilting a little bit, whether positively or negatively, where they're no longer going to be logical, but are actually going to be making decisions that are bringing some of this emotion in. If you can figure out those psychological dynamics, you have such a strong handle on their tells, on the things that are actually motivating them and how they play out in their decision making. That's all you're looking for in tells. You're trying to figure out, can I get deeper? Is this information about the person's decision process?
Earlier, we talked about misinterpreting mood as information, and I meant to ask, is that kind of like when I'm hangry, things look different?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's even, the term hangry is brilliant, by the way. I don't know who coined it, but
Yeah, I don't know.
they should get some sort of
It's a real thing.
linguistic medal. It's a real phenomenon. Yes, that is exactly why hangry works the way it works, because you actually get angry when you get hungry, and you actually get emotional. You're not making decisions as rationally. Can I figure out whether what hunger does to you? Can I figure out what fatigue does to you? Can I figure out what all these different things do to your decision process? If I can, I don't even need to know your physical tells. I can just figure out where you are emotionally and use that. And by the way, I get hangry, but I just kind of get listless. I get my attention span goes away, and I don't want to listen to anything. And sometimes I'll snap at people. So yeah, sometimes I'll actually get angry. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait, when was the last time I ate? Hold on, guys.
Yeah. Do you carry food with you and like bust out a granola bar or something at the table? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Always. I think it's really important, especially because I have very low blood pressure. So it's something that I've always had to do, because if it drops, I can faint.
Yeah, that doesn't make for good. Well, it makes for great TV. There's that.
And it makes for good literature.
Yes. Yeah, fainting and face down in your chips though could be
Yeah.
be something you'd never live down. Before we close here, there was an interesting note about superstition and gambling and why
Yeah.
you should never start to believe this. And it seems like gambling has even more superstition than baseball and other sports, right?
Yeah.
Like you see baseball players kick the mound and then bat their cleats and then they do all these but gambling, it's just everywhere. And I thought it was kind of this cutesy little stupid thing that doesn't really affect much, but you feel really strongly, or at least it seems so in the
Yeah.
book, that you should never start to get into superstition and the psychological effects.
I do feel very strongly about it.
What's
because
going on
I
here?
think-
Why?
Because I think it can affect you negatively. I think that you are giving up control when you start believing in superstitions. And we already have limited control. Why would you give up even more of it? So if you have a lucky object and you misplace it the morning of an important tournament, that's going to affect your mental equilibrium. You might not think it does. You might think, oh, I'll bounce back because I know it's stupid. I know
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter, but it's nagging there. And it's nagging in the back of your head. And all of a sudden you don't perform as well,
Yeah.
because there's a huge tie between your mental state and how you perform. And I tell a story about an Olympic athlete, a runner who didn't wear her Lucky Charm necklace during a race and blamed that for the fact that she lost, and then won the next race when she wore the necklace.
Interesting. We make our own luck when it comes to that kind of stuff then.
When it comes to that thing, there's a huge mind-body connection. And one of the things I write about, which is really scary if you think about it, but also really cool, is the nocebo effect. So everyone knows about the placebo effect, that if
Right.
you believe something works, it works. There's also a nocebo effect. So there are people, like, if you believe that you can be cursed and that a witch doctor cursed you can actually kill yourself. So there are people who have just made themselves incredibly sick because they thought that they were cursed by a witch doctor. And then there's a really interesting study where some enterprising physicians decided to uncurse them. So they made up words and did a reverse curse, and the person got better.
Oh.
There was a guy in a depression study who was, so the study had both an antidepressant and a placebo. And one evening was just, he'd had enough and decided to take all the pills and was admitted to the hospital. They didn't think that he was going to make it because of the overdose, because of his vitals were just crashing. Everything was crashing.
So he
And
took
then
all the pills from the doctor.
he took all the pills he had, yes.
Okay.
And then once he got admitted and he was crashing and people thought he wasn't going to make it, it turned out when they did blood work that he was taking the placebo.
So he took
he'd
a bunch
actually
of sugar
taken,
pills.
he just took sugar pills. And once he was told that, he recovered.
Wait. His
And then-
vital signs were crashing because he
Oh,
thought
everything
he
was
killed
crashing.
himself?
Yes.
And then he was like, oh, I just took sugar pills. I'm fine.
That's how powerful our mind is.
What? I would not believe that if you didn't tell me. If anyone else told me this.
Okay, I'm going to tell you one more
Yeah.
of these. There was a guy who was diagnosed with a fatal metastatic cancer and given 2 to 3 months to live. And he died within 2 months or something. They did an autopsy and it ends up he was misdiagnosed. He had a benign cancer and it couldn't have possibly killed him. So he did have cancer, but it was benign and it was treatable.
Oh
But
my God.
he thought he was going to die, and so he just kind of gave up on life.
I didn't even know that you could physically do that to yourself.
You can our brain is so powerful. That's why I'm so anti-superstition, because you do not realize what an effect you can have. And people are like, oh, but what about the positive effect? I'm like, yeah, but what about the negative?
Right, yeah. Well, sometimes it makes me happier. Oh, and sometimes it kills you in a horrible way that was totally unnecessary. Like, doesn't balance out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, if you have a lucky shirt, what happens like if you forget to pack it for a trip?
Yeah.
What then? You know, if you have any sort of lucky rituals, if you overslept and you can't do your lucky ritual, what now? You know, is it going to be bad? Are you, like, it's bad. I think
Yeah,
it's
you're handing over power to something in a way that you don't have to do when we're already powerless in so many other areas.
exactly.
So why add
Thank you.
another variable, right?
That's exactly right. You want to capture as much control as you can. You don't want to be giving it away to a lucky object and seeding it and saying, oh, you know, I'm winning because of this. However, whenever anyone asks me, I have this set of dice that I will trade out when I'm traveling and put one on the table. My niece gave them to me, and it makes her really happy. I take pictures of them from around the world. I'm like, hi, here's the blue die in Macau.
Yeah.
You know, here's the green one in Barcelona, and that's why I do it. And a lot of times people are like, oh, is that your lucky die? And I'm always like, yep,
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Absolutely. Because if they think I have lucky objects, maybe they'll make a different impression of me.
Ah, yeah, and they'll maybe try to swipe it, and you're like, you think I'm going to be on tilt because you took my die, but I don't care.
No, I'd be
Well,
pissed.
my niece is going to
got
claw your
those-
eyes out. Yeah.
My niece got those for me from Italy. They're made out of glass. They're really beautiful.
Oh, so you almost have, it's not a lucky thing, but it could still trigger you. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'd be upset if someone stole my die.
Well, nobody steal the die. You just gave that out in public. Maybe we should edit that out. I don't know. Do you still play poker then? Are you still going?
I was going to be. So right now was supposed to be the World
Oh,
Series of Poker, and then
right.
COVID happened. So I'm actually going to New Jersey in July to play online for the World Series online. So
you have to go to New Jersey from New York because it's
Yes.
illegal.
Exactly.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense, right?
you can't just
You
use like
cross-
a
you
VPN or
cross a
something.
river?
Yeah, come on.
I mean, no. I mean, I'm very much a stickler for not going into the shades of gray.
It's not worth losing your winnings and possibly
Exactly.
going to jail because
That's
you couldn't
exactly
cross
right.
the river.
It's just not worth it. It's
Yeah.
just not worth it.
Why not switch then from writing books to just playing professional poker entirely?
Because I love writing. I mean, that's what that's what gets me going. It's what keeps me going. When I don't write, I feel like there's a big hole missing. So I will always be a writer.
Well, you're a great writer. I loved this book. I recommend everybody grab it. The link's in the show notes. I read the whole thing and I plowed through it, and it was really a pleasure to read. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Maria. Always good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me back, Jordan. I always enjoy our conversations.
If you like that, there's a lot more just like it on the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. You can find that in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now. Now click here for an interview with Simon Sinek. Click here for an interview with Instagram founder Kevin Systrom, and click here to subscribe to the channel.